The Galactic Assembly had seen conquerors before. They had seen hive minds that stripped worlds to bone, silicon intellects that calculated genocide as a rounding error, and warrior empires whose children were born gripping blades. The Assembly endured them all by the same method: appeasement, containment, or extinction. Humans were none of those things, which is why the Assembly didn't know what to do with them. When humanity first reached the stars, expectations were low. They came from a mid-sized spiral arm, from a yellow dwarf system that most charts had labeled statistically unremarkable. Their ships were ugly, blocky, overbuilt, clearly designed by engineers who valued redundancy over elegance. Their first envoy arrived late. Their translator glitched. And when asked about their greatest military achievement, the human ambassador, an elderly female with silver hair and a tired smile, said, "We fought ourselves for about 10,000 years. Still not done, honestly." The chamber laughed. Predator species clicked in amusement. Energy beings pulsed with mockery. Even the ancient Selnari, who had survived 3 galactic resets, recorded humanity as non-threatening, internally unstable, low priority. Humans were granted observer status. A footnote. 5 cycles later, the devouring tide arrived. They weren't an empire. They weren't negotiable. They were a slow-moving, interstellar ecological collapse, a biome that consumed everything, converted matter into more of itself, and moved on. The tide had eaten 14 civilizations before anyone understood what it was. Worlds went dark without distress calls. Fleets vanished mid-transit. Stars were dimmed as entire systems were dismantled for biomass. The Assembly mobilized too late. The great navies, the crystalline armadas of the Keth, the psionic battle groups of the Varel, the self-repairing war forms of the Mech Synod, met the tide at the Realist Corridor. They were annihilated, not defeated, erased. The Assembly fractured. Species fled to their core worlds. Others sealed themselves behind energy veils and hoped entropy would forget them. Humanity received the warning 3 days later. There was no assembly vote from Earth, no philosophical debate, no demand for compensation. Instead, something strange happened. Human shipyards tripled output within weeks. Civilian vessels were stripped and refitted. Mining colonies detonated their own moons to harvest raw materials faster. The Assembly watched in confusion as humanity did something no other species had ever attempted. They armed everyone. Freighters received spinal cannons. Medical ships carried torpedo racks. Even exploration vessels were fitted with crude but powerful mass drivers. When questioned, the human reply was simple: if it can fly, it can fight. The tide reached human space sooner than expected. The outer colony of New Carthage was overrun in hours. 12 million dead. No survivors. The Assembly marked humanity for extinction, but the humans didn't retreat. They advanced. A hastily assembled human fleet intercepted the tide near the red giant Karos 9. Their ships were slower, their weapons were weaker, their shields were laughable by galactic standards. They lost 63% of their fleet in the first engagement, and yet the tide slowed. Human ships rammed when weapons failed. Crews overloaded reactors rather than abandon ship. Boarding parties detonated themselves inside enemy biomass nodes. The tide had never encountered a species that treated self-destruction as a tactic. The human fleet died almost to the last ship, but the tide retreated. For the first time in recorded history, it retreated. The Assembly finally paid attention. Human engineers studied tide wreckage not for weeks, but hours. They abandoned elegance entirely. Their weapons became uglier, louder, more violent. They developed entropy bombs that destabilized biomass cohesion, grav-lance arrays that tore living ships apart at the molecular level, AI-assisted suicide protocols that ensured no vessel could be captured intact. When asked why their technology advanced so quickly, a human scientist answered, "We've been fighting extinction since we crawled out of the ocean. This isn't new to us." The final stand occurred at Assembly Corps World Veshtor. The tide arrived in force, more mass than had ever been recorded, enough to end the galaxy's political center in a single cycle. The assembly fleets were gone. Only humanity answered the call. 3,000 human ships emerged from hyperspace. They were outnumbered 10 to 1. The assembly prepared evacuation protocols. Then the humans did something insane. They burned their retreat vectors. Human commanders broadcast one message across all frequencies. "This line holds. There is no fallback." What followed was not a battle. It was a meat grinder. Human ships formed layered kill zones, rotating damaged vessels. The assembly rebuilt. Statues were raised, memorials etched into stars. Entire days of silence observed. Humanity declined territorial rewards. They declined political dominance. They asked for one thing only: a seat, not as observers, as equals. The vote was unanimous. Galactic record, entry species, human classification, death world origin, primary traits, persistence, adaptability, spite, notable behavior, willingness to die to ensure others live. Advisory: do not corner, do not underestimate, do not assume surrender. Conclusion: humans are not the strongest species. They are not the smartest. They are simply the ones who refuse to stop. And in a galaxy that had nearly ended, that was enough.